Lonely CEO millionaire leaves his safe open to test his maid. What she did next? Did someone leave the safe open? Claire whispered, the words barely audible as she froze in the doorway of the study. The Ashworth mansion was quiet that morning, still wrapped in the hush of dawn. Pale sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows on the gleaming marble floor. A grand chandelier hung above, glittering faintly, and the rhythmic ticking of a century-old grandfather clock echoed through the silence. Everything was still, except for the open vault. The safe sat across the room, its steel door gaping wide. Inside, bundles of $100 bills were stacked neatly beside velvet cases of diamonds, gold bracelets, and sealed legal documents. It looked deliberate, exposed, like a stage set for temptation. Hidden just beyond the hallway in the shadowed archway stood Alexander Ashworth. At 33, he was already a legend. Ruthless in business, isolated in life. His name was synonymous with control, wealth, power, structure. He trusted only these. Love had betrayed him. Friends had used him. Those who swore loyalty had stolen behind his back. The only thing Alexander truly relied on now was observation. And what he observed this morning would tell him everything. She was right on time. Claire Williams, 27, entered the study precisely at 8:42 a.m. She was slender, her blonde hair tied in a low bun, wearing a simple gray uniform with white trim. She walked with practiced precision, always respectful, always silent. She had been working for him just over 2 months. In that time, she had never asked for anything, never overstepped, and never once looked him in the eye longer than was appropriate. But something about her lingered in his mind. Something about her quiet sorrow, and how she seemed to carry an invisible weight, always with dignity. He had to know. Was it real? Claire stepped into the room, cloth in hand, but stopped cold when she noticed the open safe. Her breath caught. Her eyes darted toward the hallway. No one. Alexander's pulse quickened. She moved slowly, cautiously. Her eyes lingered on the contents, but not with greed, with confusion. Her hand tightened slightly around the dusting cloth. Then, without a word, she walked toward the vault. Not to touch the money, but to gently wipe the edge of the door. She cleaned with slow, reverent strokes, never disturbing the contents, never glancing over her shoulder. Alexander leaned closer, watching every motion. Then something happened he did not expect. Claire reached into the pocket of her apron and pulled out a small folded photograph. She stared at it for a moment. Her expression softened. Pain flickered across her face, then disappeared behind the calm again. She looked around once more to make sure she was alone, then quietly placed the photo on the edge of the safe, just beside the stacks of cash. She whispered something. Alexander strained to hear, but could not make out the words. Her voice was barely more than breath. Then gently, she lifted the photo again, pressed her lips to it, and returned it to her pocket. She closed the vault door. No hesitation. No second glance. The moment passed. Claire moved on, dusting the bookshelf, the desk, the armchair beside the fireplace. As if the open safe had never existed. Alexander remained still in the shadows, stunned. He had expected fear, or perhaps temptation. At the very least, a flicker of interest. But what he saw instead was something far more disarming. Restraint, grace, a sacred kind of dignity that no amount of wealth could touch. For a long time after she left, he stood staring at the now closed safe. Then, he walked to the center of the room and opened it himself. The money was untouched. The jewelry lay as he had left it. But he kept thinking about the photo, about the whisper, about the way she had treated the contents of the vault, not as temptation, but as something unworthy of her concern.
It was no longer about the test.
It was about her. Alexander sat down in the leather chair behind the desk, his reflection faintly visible in the polished surface. He loosened his tie and stared at his hands. For years, they had built empires, signed contracts, ended partnerships. But this morning, he had seen something that shook him deeper than any business betrayal ever had. He had seen someone choose honor over desperation, and it changed everything.
Despair.
They were made of release. Later that day, she called the number at the bottom of the transfer document. The woman on the line was kind, warm. "Yes, Miss Williams," she said. "Mr. Ashworth told us to be ready. Your mother can be moved as early as tomorrow." Claire hung up and sat in silence. For a long time, she just held the envelope in her lap. She thought of the library, The way he had looked at her, not like a servant, but like a person. The way his voice had trembled when he spoke of betrayal and loneliness. The tea left on the counter. The trust, tentative but real, beginning to grow. That night, Claire stood by her daughter's beds as they slept, brushing a stray hair from Ava's forehead. The scholarship paper was still on the kitchen table, the seal of St. Gregory's catching the light from the window. She had imagined this moment so many times, help arriving, a miracle, but never like this. Not quiet, not wordless, not wrapped in such grace. And still, a voice inside her whispered doubt. Why? Why would a man like Alexander Ashworth go to such lengths? But then she remembered his eyes when he spoke of his past, the walls he had built, the silence he had lived in, and how, little by little, he had let her in. The next morning, she walked into the Ashworth estate at exactly 7:02 a.m., as she always did. Her posture was straight, her uniform pressed, but her expression held something new, resolve. She did not speak of the envelope.
Neither did he.
But as she passed him in the hallway on the way to the kitchen, she paused just briefly and said, "Thank you for seeing me." Alexander nodded, his voice low. It was long overdue. And in that moment, something shifted. Not loud, not dramatic, but sure. They were no longer employer and employee. They were two people who had survived loss, who knew the weight of silence, and who somehow had begun to understand one another. Without fanfare, without pretense, just two souls meeting halfway. The office on the 5th floor of Ashworth Enterprises was unlike the others. No marble, no high-tech equipment, no rows of assistants in tailored suits. Instead, it was filled with drawings by children, stacks of files labeled with names and dates, and shelves of books on childhood trauma, education, and nonprofit work. This was the new department Alexander had been quietly forming for months, the Ashworth Foundation. A project close to his heart, but always shelved, incomplete until Claire. He invited her in one late afternoon, just as the rain began to patter softly against the windows. She stood in the doorway, hesitant, wiping her hands on the apron she still wore. "This is yours if you want it," Alexander said, motioning toward the desk. "I want to expand our outreach, support single mothers, help their children stay in school, provide housing, counseling. But I need someone who understands what that really means. Someone who's lived it." Claire's eyes widened. "Me?" He nodded. "You're not just good. You're capable. You've seen both sides of the struggle. And somehow you still stand tall." She walked in slowly, fingers brushing the edge of the desk. "You trust me with all this?" Alexander looked at her, his gaze